Rain fell hard on the rusted metal roof above the slave market. Xeno stood still, chained to a cold steel post. Her purple skin covered in bruises and grime. She didn't shiver anymore, not because she was strong, but because she was tired. Tired of pain, tired of being hurt, tired of being called broken. Other slaves were sold quickly strong arms, young faces, useful parts, but not her. She had been in that cage for weeks, maybe months. No one cared. A sign hung on her collar, written in 3 languages. Defective unit, no refunds. Humans, aliens. And bots passed her without even looking. Some laughed, some spat. Xeno just stared at the floor, trying to forget she still existed. Then came footsteps, slow and heavy, not rushing like the others. A man in dusty clothes, goggles on his head, and a worn-out coat. He walked past all the bright cages and glowing displays, and stopped right in front of her. Xeno slowly raised her eyes, just enough to see his face. He didn't flinch, didn't mock, didn't look away. He just stared, not at her body, but at her face, her eyes. "You human," barked the auctioneer. "A fat, lizard-like alien. You looking for droids?" "Workers." "That one's trash." The human tilted his head. What happened to her? She disobeyed, bit a buyer once, never spoke again. Scared of touch, can't work. Can't serve broken toy. The man didn't speak for a moment, just looked at her hands, at the old scars. The missing fingernail, the shaking fingers. Xeno turned her eyes away, ashamed. "How much?" the man asked. The auctioneer laughed. "Huh, you want her? 5 credits, and I'll throw in the collar." People nearby snickered, some recording the moment with floating cams. A human buying a worthless slave. That would go viral in seconds. The man reached into his coat, pulled out 5 dirty credit chips, and tossed them on the table. The auctioneer blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "Chain 2, the man said, pointing. "She's not walking far in this weather." Xeno felt her heart beat for the first time in days. She didn't know why, but something about this man felt quiet, not safe, maybe, but not dangerous either. The auctioneer unlocked her collar with a hiss and dropped the chain in the man's hand. "There you go, junk collector. Enjoy your mistake." The man didn't reply, just nodded and turned, gently. Tugging the chain, Xeno followed, too weak to fight, too confused to think. Rain hit her skin, and it felt real again. Cold, painful, alive. They walked for minutes in silence. Past garbage piles, broken ships, hungry dogs. The man didn't speak, didn't look back. Just walked steady. Then finally, he stopped under a broken canopy and turned around. He looked at her with calm, tired eyes. Not angry, not kind, just real. "What's your name?" he asked. Xeno blinked, lips dry, voice gone. He didn't press, just sighed and said, "I'm Marcus." He reached into his bag and handed her something warm, a piece of bread, soft and fresh. Xeno held it like it was gold. Eyes wide, "No poison," he said, almost joking. "Just food." She took a bite, and tears filled her eyes. He sat on an old crate, tossed his coat around her shoulders, and leaned back. She sat down slowly, her body shaking with every move. After a long silence, Xeno whispered her first word in a long time. "Why?" Marcus didn't open his eyes, just said quietly, "You looked like someone who didn't deserve to be there." Xeno looked at him, confused. He added, "And maybe I'm tired of seeing good people thrown away like trash." Lightning flashed in the sky above them, and for the first time in months, Xeno didn't feel like an object. She felt human, not whole, not safe, not healed, but maybe just, maybe repairable. Xeno hadn't spoken another word during the long walk to his place. Her feet bled, her chain dragged, but Marcus never pulled or yelled. He just walked beside her like she was someone normal. Like this was a quiet evening stroll and not a slave. Walking beside her new owner, his home wasn't much. Just a metal shack on the edge of the scrapyard. But to Zira, it looked like a castle. There were no cages, no electric walls. No guards shouting orders, only tools on tables. Old blankets folded neatly, and a kettle warming on a small stove. Marcus pushed the door open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. Zira hesitated. Slaves never went in before their masters. He noticed her frozen steps and said nothing. Just walked past her like it wasn't a big deal. Inside, it smelled like oil, steam, and something warm, real food. She stayed close to the door, back straight, ready to run if needed. Marcus didn't seem to care. He removed his coat, threw it on a hook, then opened a small box and pulled out a first aid kit. Zira flinched when he walked near her. Eyes wide, hands raised, Marcus stopped and gently placed the kit on the table. "You can clean up if you want," he said softly, then stepped away. She didn't move, not at first, but after a long minute. She limped toward the table. Her fingers shook as she opened the kit, and she stared at the bandages like they were strange alien tools. She wasn't used to fixing herself, she was used to being left broken. But she tried, slow and careful, wrapping her ankle where the chain had dug in. Marcus didn't watch her. He was cooking, something bubbling in a pot on the stove. The smell made her dizzy, like memories from another life. Food without fear. When he placed the bowl on the table, she stared at it, unsure if it was truly hers. He grabbed another bowl and sat on the floor, eating without speaking. Only after seeing him take the first few bites did she sit, just barely, and pick up the spoon. Each bite was a miracle soft, warm, and not stolen. When she was done, she placed the bowl down gently, almost like she was afraid it would break the moment. Marcus stood and opened a drawer, pulling out a folded blanket. He walked past her and dropped it on the small bed in the corner. "You sleep there," he said. "It's cleaner than the floor." Zira blinked, confused. Looking from the blanket to him, where would he sleep? He rolled out a thin mat on the floor and lay down like it was the most normal thing in the world. Zira stared at him in silence, then slowly walked over to the bed. She touched the blankets, soft, real, not made of metal or chains. She sat down, curled up, but didn't sleep. Not yet. Her eyes stayed open, watching him, trying to understand. No orders, no hitting, no cold voices. Just silence and breathing and a broken heater making clicking sounds. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. She wasn't sure. But then, she whispered something into the dark. "Zira." Marcus didn't move, but his voice answered gently. "Nice to meet you, Zira." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said her name like that. Like it meant something. Like she was someone. Not something. That night, Zira didn't sleep much. But she didn't cry either. She just lay there, curled in a warm blanket, listening to the quiet breaths of the strange human who bought her but hadn't touched her, hadn't hurt her, hadn't even asked for anything. The old scars still ached. The fear still sat heavy in her chest. But deep down, something else was growing, something small, like a spark in the cold. Hope, real, dangerous hope. And Zira didn't know yet whether that was the most painful thing of all. But she didn't look away from it this time. She let it burn. She let it live. The days that followed were quiet. Zira woke before Marcus every morning, sitting near the corner of the room with the blanket wrapped tightly around her. She didn't run, even though the door was never locked. She didn't speak much either, just nodded or shook her head. But she watched him closely. Every move, every word. Marcus didn't ask questions, didn't push her. He worked in the scrapyard, fixing machines, trading spare parts, and sometimes helping neighbors. Zira followed, always a few steps behind, Holding her blanket like a shield, other aliens stared at her, whispered behind their hands. Some laughed. That's the broken slave. She's useless, like a toy with no battery. Marcus ignored them, and Zero tried to do the same. At night, he cooked, and she cleaned the plates, slowly, carefully, like they might disappear if she moved too fast. Sometimes he talked about Earth, about what rain tasted like back home, or how sunsets looked over green oceans. Zero listened. Even if she didn't understand everything. One evening, Marcus pulled out an old metal box and set it in front of her. It clicked open with a hiss, revealing a telescope. "This," he said. "Lifting the dusty device is how you see the stars without flying." He stepped outside and set it up on a tripod, adjusting knobs and muttering softly to himself. Zero stood in the doorway, unsure, until he turned and waved her over. "Try," he said. Backing away from the scope, Zero stepped closer, slowly, afraid it might be a trick, but it wasn't. She leaned in and looked through the eyepiece, gasping. Softly, the stars weren't just dots, they were huge. Burning colors moving like slow fire. She stared in awe, her mouth slightly open. Marcus smiled. "Beautiful, right?" Zero nodded, eyes wide, then he added, "Just like you when you're not glaring at me." Zero turned sharply, blinking, confused. Marcus held up his hands, grinning, kidding. She tilted her head, unsure, but the way he looked at her. It wasn't cruel, it was just silly, and then without warnings, Ira laughed. It wasn't loud or strong, more like a choked sound, like a child who forgot how, but it was real. Marcus blinked, surprised, then chuckled. There it is. Zira covered her mouth, embarrassed, but she couldn't stop. The sound shook her chest, unfamiliar but warm, and in that moment, under a sky full of stars. A slave laughed like a girl again. The next day, something had changed. She started humming. While cleaning, small quiet tunes without words, Marcus noticed but said nothing, just smiled to himself. Later, he handed her a small tool, a metal cutter, and pointed to a broken panel. "Can you fix that?" he asked. Zero looked at the tool, then at the panel, then nodded. Her fingers moved slowly, but they remembered things. Wires, circuits, screws. She had worked before, long ago, and now, for the first time. She wasn't being forced. She was helping, by choice. When the machine buzzed back to life, she looked at Marcus like a child showing off a drawing. He clapped once and said, "Well done, Mechanic Zira." Her smile was small, but it stayed longer. This time, that evening, while eating, a message beeped on Marcus's old terminal. He walked over, opened the screen, and frowned. Zira noticed the change in his eyes, the sudden tension in his jaw. "What is it?" she asked softly, surprising herself. Marcus sighed. "Someone's asking questions about you?" Zira froze, fingers tightening around the spoon. He looked at her, calm but serious. "We'll be careful, all right? I'm not letting anyone take you." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But her heart beat faster. The old fear rising again, because in her world, good things never lasted long. And someone somewhere had just remembered that Zero was missing. The next morning was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus packed supplies into an old duffel bag while Zero watched from the edge of the room. She didn't ask questions, but she knew something was wrong. His shoulders were stiff. His eyes kept checking the window. He handed her a small device, something shaped like a stone. "If something happens," he said, "press the center and run." Zira stared at it, confused. "Run where?" Marcus looked at her and gave a small smile. "Anywhere but here." She didn't smile back. For the first time in days, her heart ached not from fear or pain, but from something worse. The fear of losing what little she had found. They didn't go to the scrapyard that day. Instead, they stayed inside, lights off, curtains drawn. Marcus showed her how to block the back door with a wrench and jam the front door with a pipe. Zero obeyed, fast and sharp, like old instincts taking over. But when she looked at his face again, she didn't see fear, just calm. That calm scared her more. Then the sound came, a deep humming from the sky, a patrol ship, low and slow. Circling like a bird searching for prey, Zira's hands began to shake. Marcus peeked outside, then quickly pulled her into the corner. "Don't move," he whispered. "Don't speak." The door burst open with a crash. 2 alien soldiers stormed in gray armor, glowing visors, and no mercy. One grabbed Marcus by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "You!" The soldier shouted. "Where is she?" "The property you took." Marcus didn't speak. The other soldier scanned the room, then spotted Zira crouching in the corner. He grinned under his helmet. "Found her." Zira stood, chest rising fast, hands trembling. The soldier walked over and grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the door. She cried out, but he didn't stop. Marcus struggled, kicked, tried to break free. They hit him with an electric baton, and he dropped to the floor. Groaning, Zira screamed, not in fear, but in rage. "Let him go," she shouted, surprising even herself. The soldier turned and slapped her hard, sending her to the ground. "You don't give orders," he hissed. "You belong to the Empire." Zira coughed, blood on her lip. They dragged her outside, chains clinking. As the patrol ship lowered its ramp, rain poured again, just like the day she was bought. But this time, it felt worse, because this time she had something to lose. Marcus tried to crawl after her, but they kicked him down, leaving him bleeding in the mud. Zira looked back at him, broken. Gasping, her heart shattered, they threw her into a cold steel cell inside the ship and locked the door. She lay there, chained again, soaked and shivering. The taste of blood and fear mixed on her tongue. Memories rushed back of cages, of screams, of nights without names. She curled into herself, sobbing quietly. But then her hand brushed against something, the small stone Marcus gave her, still hidden in her sleeve. She stared at it through teary eyes. It was warm now, humming slightly. She remembered his words, "Press the center and run." But where would she go? He was the only place she'd ever felt safe, and now he was hurt, alone, maybe dying. She couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. Her fingers pressed the stone. A quiet click, then silence. But outside the ship, in the mud, a hidden signal burst from the earth just as Marcus opened one swollen eye. He smiled weakly, despite the pain. She remembered. He whispered, before losing consciousness again. Inside the ship, Zira wiped her face, sat upright, and stared. At the locked cell door, her fear was still there, but behind it, something else had returned. Not anger, not panic. Resolve. She was not the same slave they took before. She was Zira, and Marcus had repaired more than her body. He had repaired her. Well, now, it was her turn to fight. Zira sat in the dark cell, her fingers tight around the warm stone Marcus had given her. It pulsed once more, soft and steady, then went silent. Outside her cell, the ship hummed through the sky, quiet and cold. Zira's arms still ached from the soldier's grip, but she didn't cry anymore. She just waited, eyes fixed on the door. Minutes passed, maybe more, before something strange happened. A quiet beep echoed from the hallway, followed by a mechanical hiss. The lights above her flickered, once, twice, then dimmed to red. She stood, heart pounding. Then click. Her cell door unlocked, sliding open just a crack. Zira didn't move right away. Was it a trick? A test? She waited, listened, then stepped forward, slow and silent. The hallway was empty. Wires sparking on one side, smoke drifting from the ceiling vent. Marcus had done something. She knew it. He must have rigged the ship's systems from the scrapyard. using the beacon stone she activated. She limped forward, barefoot, her breath held tight. Her body remembered the paths from years ago, where to walk, where not to step, around the corner. A weapon locker stood wide open. Inside was a stun baton, just like the one they used on Marcus. She took it, feeling its weight in her hand. Not heavy, not light, but enough. Voices echoed ahead to soldiers arguing in another hallway. "Systems failure in Sector 3, one said, annoyed. "Get a tech bot. I'm not crawling through vents again," the other snapped. Zira crouched low and moved past them silently. Her body small and quick like a shadow. Her mind burned with one goal: get out, find Marcus, save him. She reached the escape pod bay. Fingers trembling as she entered the code Marcus taught her once. It beeped red, locked. She tried again, slower this time. And it flashed green. The doors slid open, and the pod lights glowed to life, but she didn't enter. Not yet. She couldn't leave without him. Zira turned and ran back the way she came. She didn't know how she'd get him off the ground, didn't know what would happen next, but she ran anyway. The ship began to shake. Something exploded in the lower decks, maybe Marcus's sabotage. Maybe fate. An alarm blared across the halls. Red lights spinning, metal groaning. Zira found the exit ramp controls and slammed her hand on the lever. Steam hissed. The doors opened, and she saw the scrapyard again. The same mud, the same broken ships, the same sky, and there lying in the mud was Marcus, unmoving, covered in bruises and rain. She screamed his name and rushed down the ramp, falling to her knees beside him. His eyes were closed, face pale, lips cracked. "Marcus," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "Marcus, wake up." No answer. She pulled his arm over her shoulders, groaning with effort, and began to drag him toward the ramp. Each step was a battle, her legs screaming, her back burning, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The soldiers inside were shouting now. Coming back toward the exit, Zira pulled him faster. Using strength she didn't know she had, finally she made it to the pod, threw him inside, and collapsed next to him. The door hissed shut just as plasma fire burned across the ground outside. She slammed the launch button, and the pod rocketed upward. The force threw her back against the seat, her body shaking, her hands still gripping his. The stars returned, this time not through a telescope, but real. And in that moment, she cried not from fear, not from pain, but because she hadn't failed him. Not this time. Marcus groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. "Zero." He whispered, weak, confused. She smiled through tears. "You saved me first." He blinked, then gave a small, painful smile. "You were never broken," he whispered, before passing out again. Zero leaned back, wiping her face. He was alive. They were flying, and the past was behind them now. She wasn't a toy anymore. She wasn't a slave. She was free, and she had done it with her own hands. The escape pod sped through space, spinning between stars and wreck fields. Zira sat beside Marcus, one hand on the controls, the other holding his wrist. Checking his pulse every few seconds, he was still breathing. But barely. His face was pale, sweat on his forehead, and his side had turned dark with bruising. She had wrapped his wounds the best she could with old cloth from the pod's supply box. But she needed help, real help, and fast. Zira had never flown anything in her life, but Marcus had taught her how to read simple maps and star charts. She studied them now, lips pressed tight, trying not to panic. There was one place nearby, a small trading outpost called Station Kielanine. It was neutral, full of smugglers, junkers, and people who didn't ask questions. If they could make it there, maybe they could hide. She changed course, gripping the lever tight. Suddenly, a red light flashed on the console. Zira's heart dropped. Ah! Ship was following them fast and armed. It wasn't the same patrol ship, but the shape was familiar. Private hunters, likely hired by the old owners. The bounty on her head must have gone live. Zero looked at Marcus, unconscious and defenseless. Then, back at the radar, the pursuers were closing in. Her fingers flew across the panel, activating the pod's decoy's flares. And whatever tricks Marcus had installed, she didn't know what half the buttons did. But she trusted her instincts. A blast shook the pod, systems sparking. Alarms screaming, Zera's. Teeth clenched, eyes burning, she pulled the ship into a tight spin. Ducking behind a drifting freighter wreck, the hunter ship overshot, firing wildly into the black. Zero used the moment to boost forward, full speed toward Kilo 9. The engines roared and the pod groaned. But it held together. Another blast hit the tail. Spinning them hard, Zera slammed her shoulder against the wall, pain shooting through her arm, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Not until they were. Safe, the station came into view. Giant wheel spinning above a dead moon. Covered in blinking lights and rusted docking arms, she opened a COM channel, shouting, "This is Emergency Pod Echo 2, requesting landing now." "We have wounded on board." Silence. Then a gruff voice replied, "Echo 2, you're bringing heat. We don't want trouble, please," she begged. "He's dying. I'll pay. I'll do anything." There was another pause. Then the voice sighed. "Dock in Bay 6. But if that hunter follows you inside..." "You're both getting spaced." Zero nodded fast, guiding the pod toward the entrance. The docking doors opened, metal arms catching the pod gently as it slid into the station. The moment the doors shut behind them, she collapsed over the console. Gasping, the chase was over for now, inside the station. Two medbots rolled up and lifted Marcus carefully. Zera followed close. Refusing to let them take him far from her sight, they placed him in a small clinic near the back wall of the bay. Patching his wounds and injecting him with stabilizers, she sat beside the bed, hands in her lap, waiting, watching. Praying hours passed, maybe more, until Marcus finally opened his eyes again. Zero leaned close, smiling through tears. "You flew us," he mumbled, voice weak. She nodded. Laughing quietly, "You taught me." He looked around, eyes scanning. The room then settled on her. "You did it," he said. "You got us out." She squeezed his hand. "We're not safe yet." Marcus tried to sit up, winced, then lay back. "Where are we?" He asked. "Kilo 9, she said. "Somewhere no one cares who we are." He chuckled softly. "Perfect." Outside, the bounty signal was still echoing through pirate networks and backly comms. But inside that little room, Zera and Marcus shared something stronger than fear. They had survived the chase, together. She was no longer the one being saved. She had become the rescuer. And no one slave master, bounty hunter, or soldier could take that from her now. The lights inside Kilo 9's small clinic were dim, humming softly above them. Marcus rested on the bed, still weak, but smiling more each hour. Zera stayed by his side, rarely leaving, only stepping away when she had to find food or check the hallway. She no longer looked like a slave. Her back was straighter, her voice clearer, her eyes steady. The broken girl from the auction cage was gone. In her place stood someone new, still healing, but whole in spirit. The bounty on her head had made the lower decks restless. People whispered, watched her closely, but no one dared touch her. Maybe it was the stun baton she kept by her hip. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Marcus called it the silver heart look once. Smiling as he said it, hard on the outside, shining from the inside, he told her, and she rolled her eyes. But deep down, it meant something. A few days later, the station's rebel council called for her. Zero was confused, unsure why they wanted to speak with her. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Go," he said. "Speak like someone who matters because..." You do? She walked into the large, rusted hall where smugglers, outcasts, and free minds gathered. The leader, an old cyborg with glowing red eyes, stood and looked down at her. "We heard your story," he said, voice low. "You ran from chains, brought down a ship, saved a man, and escaped the Empire's bounty." Zero said nothing, unsure if it was praise or judgment. "You're brave," the leader continued. "But more than that, you are proof to others like you that freedom is possible." She blinked, stunned. They offered her a place among them, not as a servant, not as a rescued soul, but as a voice, a fighter. Someone who could stand and speak for those who had none. Zero didn't answer right away. She walked back to the clinic, heart pounding, thoughts racing. Marcus was sitting up now, sipping broth, smiling as she entered. "How'd it go?" he asked, wiping his mouth. "They want me to stay," she said. "They want me to help others like me." Marcus nodded slowly. "That sounds like something you'd be good at." Zero sat beside him, staring at her hands. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "I was nothing. Now they want me to be something big." He reached out and touched her wrist gently. "You're not nothing," he said. "You're Zero. And that's already big enough." She smiled, a small tear slipping down her cheek. Then she asked softly, "Will you stay too?" Marcus laughed. "You're asking if I want to stay with the girl who dragged me through a battlefield and flew a ship with no training." He leaned closer. "Of course I'll stay." They laughed together, the sound soft but strong. Weeks passed, and Zira found her place on the station. She fixed machines, trained others, and spoke to young girls with bruises and silent eyes. To them, she wasn't just another voice. She was hope, the one who escaped, the one who returned, the one who didn't break. And when they asked how she did it, how she found her strength, she would smile, look up at the stars, and say, "Because." One person looked at me and didn't see garbage. He saw someone worth saving. They called her the girl with the silver heart, not because of armor or power, but because she had been melted, reshaped, and forged into something stronger than chains. And beside her always stood the man who never gave up on her. Marcus the human who had walked into an auction, bought a broken toy, and gave her back her soul. Together, they weren't just survivors. They were a team, a spark in the dark, a story whispered across stars. Not of war or weapons, but of kindness, strength, and the power of choosing to care. And in a galaxy full of noise, their quiet love was louder than anything else.